The polished floors of Luxe Haven gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, reflecting the soft buzz of Chicago's elite shopping district. Maya Jackson stepped inside, her sneakers scuffing lightly against the marble, her denim jacket brushing her hips. The air smelled of lavender and money, a scent she didn't mind but didn't chase. At 35, Maya carried herself with the quiet ease of someone who'd earned her place, though not everyone saw it that way. She'd barely crossed the threshold when a voice sliced through the hum of the store. "This isn't a thrift shop," James Peterson snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. The store manager stood near a display of $2,000 handbags, his gray suit crisp, his salt and pepper hair slicked back. His blue eyes locked on Maya, narrowing as if she were a stain on his pristine world. "People like you don't belong here." The words hit like a slap, loud enough to turn heads. Customers paused, some clutching purses, others sipping complimentary champagne, watching as James folded his arms, his smirk growing. Maya stopped, her brown eyes meeting his, her jaw tightening, but her voice steady. "I'm here to shop," she said, lifting her chin. "Same as them." James laughed, a short, cruel sound. "Shop?" he said, stepping closer. "With what? Your grocery coupons? We don't do charity cases." The room grew quieter, the tension thick. A woman in a fur coat whispered to her friend, her phone slipping out to record. Two security guards, tall, broad-shouldered men in black, moved from the corners, their boots thudding against the floor. Maya didn't flinch. She reached for her phone, her fingers brushing the simple gold band on her left hand, a ring worth more than James's car. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low but firm. "Mistake?" James scoffed, waving a hand. "Take her out, boys. She's cluttering my store." The guards grabbed her arms, their grips tight, pulling her toward the glass doors. Maya stumbled but caught herself, her sneakers squeaking as they dragged her across the marble. The crowd parted, some gasping, others smirking. With one final shove, they pushed her onto the sidewalk, the cold Chicago wind biting her face. She straightened, smoothing her jacket, her breath steady despite the burn in her chest. The doors swung shut behind her, James's smug face visible through the glass, his arms crossed like a king guarding his castle. Maya pulled out her phone, dialing a number she knew by heart. "Daniel," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "You're not going to believe this." Inside, James turned back to his customers, his smirk widening. He thought he'd won, thought he'd kept Luxe Haven pure. He had no idea the call Maya just made would turn his kingdom to dust. The Chicago wind whipped through the streets as Maya Jackson stood on the sidewalk outside Luxe Haven, her phone still warm in her hand from the call to Daniel. She adjusted her denim jacket, the same one she'd worn through years of hustle, and took a deep breath. The sting of James Peterson's words, "People like you don't belong here," lingered, but Maya wasn't new to this. She'd faced worse and come out stronger every time. At 35, she was a woman who'd carved her own path, not waiting for anyone to hand her a map. Maya grew up on the South Side, in a cramped apartment where the heat flickered and the walls echoed with her parents' quiet determination. Her father, Samuel Jackson, drove buses for the city, his hands calloused from years at the wheel. Her mother, Grace, worked nights at a diner, her apron stained with coffee and resilience. They weren't rich, but they gave Maya something money couldn't buy, a belief she could rise above anything. She'd been the kid with secondhand sneakers, acing math tests while classmates snickered at her thrift store backpack. By 18, she'd earned a full ride to Northwestern University, her ticket out of the struggle. College wasn't easy. Maya worked 2 jobs, tutoring freshmen and shelving books at the library. to cover what the scholarship didn't. She graduated with a degree in marketing, her diploma a quiet triumph over every doubter who'd ever smirked at her. After that, she climbed the ladder at a small ad agency, her ideas sharp enough to land clients twice her age. By 30, she'd started her own consulting firm, turning startups into brands with a mix of grit and brilliance. Success didn't change her, though. She still shopped clearance racks, still tipped waitresses double, still remembered the South Side in every step she took. 3 years ago, she'd met Daniel Carter at a tech conference in San Francisco. Maya was there pitching for a client, her slides crisp, her voice steady. Daniel, a 38-year-old tech billionaire, sat in the back row, his dark blazer unbuttoned, his presence understated but impossible to ignore. He'd built Carter Innovations from a garage project into a global empire, his software powering half the world's smartphones. Most people fawned over him. His wealth, his sharp jawline, his quiet charm, but Maya didn't. She finished her pitch, packed her laptop, and headed for the coffee stand without a second glance. That's what caught his eye. Later, over lukewarm lattes, he'd asked her out. "You're not like the rest," he'd said, his voice low, his brown eyes warm. She'd laughed, sipping her drink. "I hope not. I'd hate to be boring." Their first date was pizza in a hole-in-the-wall joint, not some rooftop gala. Daniel liked that she didn't care about his money, that she challenged him instead of nodding along. When they married 2 years ago, Maya kept her last name. "It's my parents' legacy," she'd told him, her tone firm. "I'm not trading it for anything." He'd smiled, respecting her roots as much as she did his. Daniel wasn't the flashy type either. Sure, he owned a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, but he drove a plain black SUV, not some gold-plated supercar. His wealth showed in subtler ways. The custom watch he never bragged about, the donations he made to Southside schools without a press release. Together, they were a power couple who didn't need to prove it. Maya handled her firm. Daniel ran his empire. They balanced each other, her fire, his calm, both grounded in a shared refusal to forget where they'd started. That morning, Maya had woken early in their penthouse, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd slipped into her usual outfit, dark jeans, a denim jacket, sneakers she'd worn for years. Daniel, tying his tie at the kitchen counter, had glanced over. "You sure you don't want Lisa to grab that stuff for the fundraiser?" he'd asked, nodding at her purse. Lisa, their assistant, handled most errands, but Maya shook her head. "Nah," she'd said, grabbing her coffee. "I like picking my own things. Keeps me real." He'd chuckled, kissing her forehead. "You're always real." She'd headed to Luxe Haven to buy a necklace for the fundraiser, a $15,000, a plate, event she'd organized for a women's shelter. The store was a fortress of wealth, all glass and gold, nestled in the heart of the Magnificent Mile. Maya didn't come for the vibe. She came for the quality. Her firm had landed a big client that week, and she wanted something special to market. Her sneakers tapped the pavement as her driver, Tony, dropped her off. "Take a break," she'd told him, waving him off. "I'll call when I'm done." Inside, she'd admired the sleek displays, handbags, jewelry, perfumes priced like small cars. She didn't flaunt her money, didn't need to. Her wedding band, a slim gold piece Daniel had designed himself, was the only hint of her worth. And even that was understated. She'd been eyeing a silver necklace, simple but striking, when James Peterson's voice cut through her thoughts. Now, standing outside, the memory of his smirk fueled the fire in her chest. Maya slipped her phone into her pocket, her breath fogging in the chilly air. She could have walked away, let it slide like she'd done 100 times before. But this wasn't just about her. It was about every kid from the South Side who'd been told they didn't belong. She glanced back at Luxe Haven, its gold logo glinting through the glass. James thought he'd humiliated her, thought he'd won. He didn't know who she was, or who Daniel was about to become in his world. The glass doors of Luxe Haven swung shut behind Maya Jackson with a sharp chime, the sound swallowed by the hum of Chicago's richest shopping strip. She stepped onto the marble floor, her sneakers scuffing faintly, her denim jacket brushing her hips as she moved. The air shimmered with wealth, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over displays of 10,000 handbags and 5,000 perfumes. At 35, Maya didn't blink at the extravagance. She'd come for a silver necklace she'd seen online. $500. A quiet reward for her firm's latest win. She wove through the crowd, her brown eyes sharp, her stride purposeful. Around her, the store pulsed with privilege. Women in fur coats cooed over diamond bracelets. Men in tailored suits bark orders at hovering clerks. Sales associates in crisp black vests darted between them, their smiles wide, their iPads flashing client names and purchase histories. A blonde in a cashmere scarf swept in, greeted with a sing-song, "Mrs. Langley, your order's ready." A guy with a Rolex strutted past, a clerk trailing him with a hushed, "Mr. Evans, this way to the VIP lounge." Maya reached the jewelry counter, her fingers grazing the cool glass. The necklace gleamed under the spotlight, silver links with a teardrop pendant. Simple but striking, just her style. She scanned for help, spotting a clerk nearby, a young woman with a tight ponytail and a pinched smile, fiddling with a tray of earrings. "Hey," Maya said, her voice clear, friendly. "Can I try this one?" She tapped the glass, pointing at the necklace. The clerk, Sarah, spun around, her eyes locking onto Maya like a hawk spotting a stray mouse. Her smile vanished, replaced by a sneer that twisted her face. "That?" she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "That's the exclusive line, honey. Starts at $3,000. She raked her gaze over Maya. Jacket, jeans, sneakers. Her lips curling as if she'd smelled something sour. "You sure you're not lost? The discount racks are by the door." The words landed like a slap, sharp and public. Heads swiveled. Customers pausing mid-sip of champagne. Clerks glancing over with smirks. Maya's stomach knotted, the old burn of judgment flaring, but she held her ground. "I'm not lost," she said, her tone steady, her chin lifting. "I want to see it. Now." Sarah laughed, a high, grating sound that echoed off the walls. "Oh, bless your heart," she said, crossing her arms, her ponytail swinging like a taunt. "This isn't a try-before-you-buy kind of place. Maybe stick to something you can actually afford." She jerked her head toward the front, where $150 keychains dangled for the less than elite. Before Maya could fire back, a shadow cut through the light, broad, commanding, unstoppable. James Peterson, the store manager, stormed over, his gray suit slicing the crowd apart, his salt and pepper hair slicked back like a crown. His blue eyes burned with a predator's focus, locked on Maya from the moment she'd walked in. He'd been circling, waiting, and now he pounced. "What's the holdup, Sarah?" he barked, his voice booming across the store, a king addressing his court. Sarah straightened, her smirk widening. "She's demanding the exclusive line, Mr. Peterson," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "Thinks she's got $3,000 to throw around in that outfit." She flicked her eyes at Maya's sneakers, her laugh bubbling up again. The room froze, a hush falling like a curtain. Customers gaped, some clutching purses, others leaning in for the show. A woman in a fur coat clutched her pearls, her whisper hissing, "Who does she think she is?" A man with a Rolex snorted, adjusting his cufflinks. A teenage girl in a glittery dress whipped out her phone, her fingers flying to record. James stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking like a countdown, his head cocked as he sized Maya up. Jacket, jeans, sneakers, like she was dirt on his pristine floor. $3,000? He said, his voice slow, theatrical, rolling through the silence. You? He threw his head back, his laugh exploding, a cannon shot that rattled the chandeliers. This is Luxe Haven, not a flea market. He spun to the crowd, his arms flinging wide, a ringmaster in his circus. Can you believe this? She strolls in here, denim and all, thinking she's one of us. Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel. The fur coat woman cackled. She's got guts. The Rolex man muttered, "What a clown." The teenage girl zoomed in, her giggle piercing the air. Maya's hands balled into fists, her nails biting her palms, but her face stayed stone. She'd faced worse, classmates mocking her thrift store clothes, bosses doubting her pitch. But this was a stage, and James was the star. "I'm a customer," she said, her voice slicing through the noise, firm and unyielding. "I want the necklace. Run my card." She yanked her wallet from her pocket, a plain leather one she'd carried for years, and slammed it onto the counter, the thud a gunshot in the chaos. James's laugh died, his eyes narrowing to slits, his face flushing red. He snatched the wallet, flipping it open, like he'd caught a thief, red-handed. "Your card?" he said, waving it at the crowd, his voice a roar. "What's this, some maxed-out junk from the gas station?" He tossed it back, letting it skid across the glass, his smirk twisting into a snarl. "You're a joke, lady. You think you can waltz in here and play rich?" The crowd jeered, a wave of sound crashing over her. "Kick her out!" the fur coat woman yelled, her pearls bouncing. "She's embarrassing herself," the Rolex man sneered, stepping back. Sarah clapped her hands, her grin feral. "Oh, this is gold," she said, leaning on the counter. The teenage girl's phone stayed up, her voice squeaking. "This is going viral." Maya's pulse hammered, the heat in her chest blazing, but she didn't blink. "Run it," she said, her voice low, deadly calm, her eyes boring into James. "Or are you too afraid to see it work?" James's smirk vanished, his jaw clenching so tight it looked ready to crack. "Afraid?" he bellowed, his arms flailing again, his face a mask of fury. "You don't talk to me like I'm some punk. I've run this store for 15 years. I know a fraud when I see one." He leaned in, his breath hot, his voice a hiss meant for her alone. "You're nothing. You don't belong here. Get that through your thick skull." The crowd roared, some clapping, some shouting. "Get her out," a voice called. "She's a disgrace," another echoed. Sarah smirked, her arms folding tighter, her eyes glinting with glee. The teenage girl hesitated, her phone dipping, her brow furrowing as if she sensed something off. Maya caught it, a crack in the wall of hate. But it wasn't enough to stop the tide. "I belong anywhere I choose," Maya said, her voice rising, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You're the one guessing, judging me by my clothes instead of my cash." She tapped her card on the counter again, the sound sharp, defiant. "Prove me wrong, or shut up." James's face twisted, his eyes wild, his hands shaking with rage. "Prove you wrong?" he spat, his voice a growl that shook the room. "I don't need to prove anything to you. You're a nobody, a cheap little nobody, and I'm done with your act." He spun on his heel, his voice a thunderclap. "Security! She's out of here." The crowd cheered, the sound crashing over Maya like a wave. She stood tall, her card still on the counter, her heart pounding but her resolve ironclad. James thought he'd humiliated her, thought he'd won his little game. He had no idea the storm he'd just invited, or the reckoning, waiting on the other side of those glass doors. The silence after Maya's card hit the counter lasted only a heartbeat, before James Peterson's laugh shattered it, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off Luxe Haven's marble walls. He held her card between two fingers, dangling it like a dirty rag, his blue eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, this is rich," he said, his voice loud, a showman playing to the crowd. "She thinks a piece of plastic makes her one of us." The room erupted, laughter, gasps, murmurs swelling into a wave. Sarah, the clerk, doubled over, her hand slapping the counter as she cackled. The woman in the fur coat smirked, whispering, "Pathetic." The man with the Rolex adjusted his cufflinks, his chuckle low and smug. The teenage girl with the phone zoomed in, her lips twitching with a grin. Maya stood still, her brown eyes locked on James, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She wouldn't give him the meltdown he wanted. "You're hilarious," James said, tossing her card back onto the counter, letting it skid toward her. "What's next? You gonna tell me you've got a mansion on Lakeshore Drive? A yacht in the harbor?" He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her space, his voice dropping to a sneer. "I've seen your type, sneaking in, pretending, wasting my time. You're not buying anything. You're here to scam us." Maya's jaw clenched, the heat in her chest flaring into something sharper. "Scam you, eh?" she said, her voice rising just enough to carry. "I told you I want the necklace. 3 grand. Run the card, or admit you're too scared to try." The crowd hushed, a flicker of surprise crossing their faces. Sarah's laugh cut off, her eyes widening. The teenage girl lowered her phone an inch, her grin fading. Even the Rolex man paused, his brow creasing. James's smirk vanished, his face flushing red, his hands balling into fists. "Scared?" he spat, his volume spiking. "You don't talk to me like that. You think you can bluff your way through this?" He snatched the card again, holding it up like a trophy, his voice booming. "Fine, let's play your little game." He turned to Sarah, snapping his fingers. "Get the reader. Let's see how fast this bounces." Sarah scrambled, pulling a sleek card reader from under the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she plugged it in. The crowd leaned in, their whispers buzzing like static, some rooting for her failure, others curious despite themselves. Maya watched, her heart pounding but her face a mask of calm. She knew what was on that card, her firm's latest payout, Daniel's quiet backing, more than enough to bury this place in receipts. James swiped it, his smirk returning as he stared at the screen, waiting for the red declined he was sure would flash. The reader beeped. Green. Approved. The total, $3,512 with tax, glowed in bold digits. The room froze. Sarah's jaw dropped, her ponytail sagging. The fur coat woman blinked, her pearls forgotten. The Rolex man coughed, his smirk gone. The teenage girl gasped, her phone dipping lower. James stared at the screen, his face draining of color, his hand shaking as he clutched the reader. "No," he muttered, swiping it again. Another beep. Approved. Maya tilted her head, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Told you," she said. "Now give me the necklace." James's eyes snapped to her, his shock twisting into rage. "This doesn't prove anything," he roared, slamming the reader down, the crack echoing. "You probably stole this card, some scam artist with a fake ID." He spun to the crowd, his arms flailing. "She's a thief. She's playing us all." The accusation hit like a bomb, the room exploding into chaos. "Thief?" the fur coat woman shrieked, clutching her bag. Check her pockets, the Rolex man barked, stepping back. The teenage girl raised her phone again, her voice squeaking. This is wild. Maya's hands clenched, her calm cracking as the weight of the lie slammed into her. I'm not a thief, she said, her voice sharp, rising above the noise. I paid. You saw it. Give me what I came for. James laughed, a manic edge to it now. His face beat red. Paid? He said. With whose money? Not yours. You don't belong here, and I'm not selling you a damn thing. He waved a hand, his voice a bellow. Security, get this fraud out of my store. 2 guards surged forward, their black suits looming, their boots pounding the marble. The crowd parted, some cheering, others gaping. Please don't touch me, Maya said, stepping back, her voice firm but steady. I'll walk out myself. They didn't listen. Rough hands clamped onto her arms, yanking her backward, her sneakers skidding across the floor. The denim jacket twisted under their grip, her wallet tumbling from her pocket, cards and cash spilling out. Let go, she snapped, twisting to free herself, but they tightened their hold, dragging her toward the doors. James followed, his voice a triumphant roar. That's right! Out with the trash! Luxe Haven's no place for liars! The guards shoved her through the glass doors, the cold Chicago wind hitting her face as they flung her onto the sidewalk. She stumbled, her knees scraping the pavement, but she caught herself, rising with a slow, deliberate grace. Inside, James stood at the glass, his arms crossed, his smirk back in full force. The crowd clapped, some hesitant, some loud, cheering his victory. Sarah scooped up Maya's wallet, tossing it into a drawer with a grin. The teenage girl posted her video, the caption already forming, "Thief caught at Luxe Haven." Maya brushed off her jeans, her scraped knee stinging, her breath fogging in the air. She could feel the eyes on her, passers-by staring, James gloating through the window. Her wallet was gone, her pride bruised, but her fire wasn't out. She pulled her phone from her jacket, her fingers steady as she dialed. Daniel, she said, her voice tight with fury but unshaken. They just threw me out, called me a thief. On the other end, Daniel's voice was calm but steel-hard. Where are you? Luxe Haven, she said, glancing back at the store, James's silhouette still smug behind the glass. Magnificent Mile. Stay there, he said. I'm handling it. Maya pocketed her phone, her eyes narrowing at the gold logo above the doors. James thought he'd won, thought he'd humiliated her into nothing. He didn't know the storm she'd just unleashed, or the man who'd make him pay for every word. The Chicago wind howled down the magnificent mile as Maya Jackson stood on the sidewalk, her scraped knee throbbing, her denim jacket twisted from the guard's rough hands. The glass doors of Luxe Haven loomed behind her, James Peterson's smug silhouette still visible, his arms crossed like a conqueror savoring his victory. Her wallet lay inside, tossed aside by Sarah, but Maya's fire burned hotter than the sting of humiliation. She clutched her phone, Daniel's last words echoing in her ears. Stay there. I'm handling it. Back in their Lake Michigan penthouse, Daniel Carter paced the hardwood floor, his dark blazer unbuttoned, his brown eyes blazing with a quiet fury. At 38, he was a man who'd turned code into billions. His company, Carter Innovations, a name whispered in Silicon Valley and Wall Street alike. The call from Maya had hit him like a punch, her voice tight, her words clipped, but her strength unshaken. They called me a thief, she'd said. Orogrom threw me out. He'd heard the tremble beneath her calm, and it lit a fuse he rarely let burn. He grabbed his phone, dialing his chief of staff, Marcus Reed. Marcus, he said, his voice low, steel hard. Luxe Haven's parent company, what's it called? Pinnacle Retail, Marcus replied, his tone crisp, already sensing the storm. Publicly traded, 50 stores, valued at $1 billion too. Buy it, Daniel said, his words a command, not a request. Controlling stake. Tonight. Marcus paused, then chuckled. You're serious? Dead serious, Daniel said, his pacing stopping as he stared out at the city lights. They messed with Maya. That's not a mistake they get to walk away from. Give me 3 hours, Marcus said. It's after market close, but I'll pull strings. 60% of shares doable? Make it happen, Daniel said. No leaks. No one knows it's me until I'm standing in that store. He hung up, his jaw tight, his mind racing. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about Maya, about every time she'd been judged, dismissed, pushed aside. He'd seen it before, felt it himself, and he'd be damned if he let it slide now. By midnight, Marcus called back. Done, he said. 63%. Cost us a chunk, but Pinnacle's ours. Board scrambling. They'll get the memo at dawn. Good, Daniel said, grabbing his keys. Meet me at Luxe Haven. 8 sharp. Bring the team. He glanced at the clock. 7 hours until sunrise. James Peterson had no idea his world was already crumbling. The next morning, the Magnificent Mile buzzed with its usual chaos. Tourists snapping photos, suits rushing to meetings. At 7:55 a.m., a black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop outside Luxe Haven, its sleek frame glinting in the dawn light. A second identical Rolls pulled up behind it, followed by 3 Escalades, their doors opening in unison. Daniel stepped out first, his charcoal suit sharp but understated, his presence a quiet thunder. Maya emerged beside him, her denim swapped for a tailored black blazer and jeans, her scraped knee hidden, but her fire blazing in her eyes. 12 men and women in crisp business attire spilled from the Escalades, each clutching a leather portfolio stamped with the Carter Innovations logo. They moved like a unit, lawyers, execs, a force of precision, forming a semicircle around the couple. Passers-by slowed, heads turning, phones lifting. Inside Luxe Haven, the staff peered through the glass, their chatter dying as they spotted the convoy. James Peterson strutted out of his office, alerted by the commotion, his gray suit pristine, his smirk intact. He adjusted his tie, barking at his team. Places, everyone. Looks like a big fish. Let's reel him in. He assumed it was some celebrity, some tycoon he could charm. He had no clue the hook was already in him. At 8 a.m., the door swung open, and Maya walked in first, her sneakers replaced with boots that clicked against the marble. Daniel followed, his steps measured, his eyes scanning the room like a general on a battlefield. The Carter team fanned out behind them, taking positions near displays, their portfolios ready. The store fell silent, the air thick with tension. Customers paused, clerks froze, Sarah's ponytail sagging as she gaped from the counter. James strode forward, his hand outstretched, his voice oozing fake warmth. Welcome to Luxe Haven, he said, his smile wide but brittle. James Peterson, manager. How can I assist you today? His eyes flicked to Maya, a flash of recognition crossing his face, but he dismissed it fast. She couldn't be with this crew, not after yesterday. Daniel stopped, his hand staying at his side, his gaze locking onto James with an intensity that made the manager flinch. You met my wife yesterday, he said, his voice calm but cutting, filling the room. Maya Jackson. You called her a thief, threw her out. James's smile cracked, his hand dropping, his face paling. Your wife? He stammered, his eyes darting to Maya, then back to Daniel. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Maya said, stepping forward, her voice steady, her stare unflinching. You saw my clothes, my skin, and decided I didn't belong. You were wrong. The crowd murmured, phones rising higher. Sarah shrank behind the counter, her smirk gone. James's mouth opened, closed, his brain scrambling for an out. Sir, we have protocols, he said, his voice rising, desperate. She didn't look like what? Daniel cut in, his tone ice cold. Like she could buy this place? She didn't have to. I did. He nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward, handing James a slim folder embossed with the Carter logo. Open it. James fumbled the folder, his hands shaking as he flipped it open. Pages of legalese stared back. Share transfers, ownership documents, Pinnacle Retail now under Carter Innovations. His eyes widened, his breath hitching. No, he whispered, flipping pages faster. This can't. It's done, Daniel said, his voice a hammer. As of 4 this morning, I own 63% of Pinnacle Retail. That means I own Luxe Haven, all 50 stores. And you. The room gasped, a collective jolt rippling through the staff. Sarah's knees buckled, her hand gripping the counter. Customers whispered, Carter? The tech guy? James's face drained to ash, his folder slipping to the floor, pages scattering. You can't, he choked, his voice breaking. This is my store. Not anymore, Maya said, her voice quiet but piercing, her eyes locked on his. You made a choice yesterday. Now we're making ours. Daniel stepped closer, his shadow swallowing James's. You're done here, he said, but we're just getting started. The Carter team closed in, their portfolios snapping open, their faces set. James staggered back, his kingdom collapsing, his smugness a memory. He'd judged the wrong woman, and now he'd face the man who'd turn his world upside down. The air in Luxe Haven crackled with tension as James Peterson stumbled back. The ownership papers from Daniel Carter's folder scattered across the marble floor like fallen leaves. His gray suit, once a symbol of control, hung loose on his trembling frame, his blue eyes darting wildly as the reality sank in. Daniel owned Pinnacle Retail, owned Luxe Haven, owned him. The store's golden glow dimmed under the weight of his collapse, the chandeliers casting shadows that swallowed his smugness whole. Daniel Carter stood firm, his charcoal suit a quiet fortress, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. You're fired, he said, the words landing like a guillotine. Effective now. Security. Escort him out. James' face twisted, his mouth gaping as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. Fired? He choked, his voice cracking, high and desperate. You can't do this. I've run this place for 15 years. 15 years! He lunged forward, his hands clawing at the air, but 2 of Daniel's team, tall figures in black suits, stepped in, grabbing his arms with iron grips. Wait! James shrieked, twisting against their hold, his polished shoes squeaking on the marble. This is my life, my store. I have a family, a mortgage, private school tuition. His voice rose to a wail, his face red, sweat beading on his forehead. The crowd, customers, clerks, Sarah, watched in stunned silence, their phones still up but their cheers long gone. Maya Jackson stepped forward, her boots clicking, her black blazer sharp against the chaos. Her brown eyes locked onto James, unyielding but calm. 15 years, she said, her voice steady, slicing through his pleas. 15 years of turning people away because they didn't look right to you. 15 years of deciding who belongs based on your rules. She paused, letting the words hang. You don't get to cry about your life when you've stepped on everyone else's. James froze, his mouth open, his eyes wide with panic. The guards tightened their grip, dragging him toward his office. No, he yelled, his voice breaking. Please, I didn't know who you were. That's the point, Maya said, her tone cold, final. You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me like a person. The room shifted, a murmur rippling through the staff. Sarah shrank behind the counter, her ponytail limp, her hands fumbling with a stack of receipts. The woman in the fur coat lowered her pearls, her face pale. The man with the Rolex slipped his phone into his pocket, his smirk replaced by unease. The teenage girl who'd recorded yesterday hesitated, her thumb hovering over her screen, her video unposted. Daniel raised a hand, his voice commanding the silence. This isn't just about him, he said, his gaze sweeping the store. Yesterday, my wife was humiliated here, called a thief, dragged out, because of how she looked. But she's not the first. And you all know it. He nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward with a tablet, tapping the screen. A projector hummed to life, casting footage onto a blank wall. Grainy clips from Luxe Haven stores across the country. Customers of color ignored, followed, dismissed. A black man in Atlanta asked for a watch, only to be told it was out of stock, while a white customer got it minutes later. A Latina woman in Miami stood at a counter, waved off as clerks fawned over someone else. The pattern was clear, undeniable, systematic. Gasps punctured the silence, staff exchanging glances, some shrinking, others staring at their shoes. Daniel's voice hardened. This ends today, he said. Luxe Haven, every one of its 50 stores, closes at noon for restructuring. No sales, no exceptions. Panic erupted. Closed, Sarah squeaked, her hands dropping the receipts. I've got quotas. Clients. A senior clerk, a wiry man named Tom, rushed forward, his vest askew. Mr. Carter, please. I've been here 10 years. I didn't what? Daniel said, his eyes narrowing. Didn't see my wife get thrown out? Your records show you ignored her too, Tom. You picked who to serve based on your gut. That's over. Tom froze, his plea dying, his face ashen. Maya stepped beside Daniel, her voice rising to match his. Some of you might stay, she said, scanning the room. The ones who treated everyone with respect can reapply after we rebuild this place. The rest of you? She paused, her gaze piercing. Take your 2 weeks severance and think hard about who you want to be. The Carter team moved like clockwork, handing out envelopes, termination notices, severance checks, each slap of paper a nail in Luxe Haven's old coffin. James thrashed as the guards hauled him into his office, his yells muffled as they forced him to grab his coat and keys. You can't do this, he screamed, his voice raw. I'll sue. Sue me, Daniel said, his tone flat, almost amused. Go ahead. My lawyers eat cases like yours for breakfast. The guard shoved James toward the doors, his coat flapping, his face a mask of rage and ruin. With one final push, they flung him onto the sidewalk, the same spot where Maya had landed yesterday. He stumbled, his knee hitting the pavement, his kingdom lost in a single morning. Inside, the staff filed out, shell-shocked, clutching their envelopes. Sarah lingered, her eyes wet, her voice a whisper. I didn't mean, she started, but Maya cut her off. You did, Maya said, her voice firm. You laughed, you helped. Own it. Sarah fled, her ponytail bouncing as she ran. The store emptied, the displays standing silent, the chandeliers dimming as Marcus flipped a switch. Daniel turned to Maya, his hand resting on her shoulder, a gesture of trust, not triumph. This isn't the end, he said, his voice softening. It's the start. She nodded, her eyes on the glass doors where James had fallen. They thought they could break me, she said, her voice low, resolute. They thought wrong. The last of the Carter team locked the doors, the blinds dropping with a soft clatter. Luxe Haven was dead, its old ways, its old king, buried in the rubble of one man's prejudice. James sat on the curb, his head in his hands, the wind whipping his tie. He'd judged Maya by her jacket, her sneakers, her skin. Now, he'd pay the price, and the world he'd built would rise anew without him. 6 months later, the magnificent mile sparkled under a crisp Chicago spring. The old Luxe Haven storefront transformed. The gold logo was gone, replaced by a sleek sign in silver. Legacy. The glass doors, once a barrier to keep people out, now stood wide open, welcoming a crowd that stretched down the block. Shoppers, bloggers, locals from the South Side Maya had never forgotten. Inside, the marble floors remained, but the chandeliers were softer, the displays accessible, not locked behind fortress-like cases. Price tags gleamed in plain sight, no more whispers of exclusivity. Maya Jackson stood at the center, her black blazer swapped for a simple white blouse and jeans, her boots clicking as she greeted staff. At 35, she wasn't just the woman James Peterson had thrown out. She was Legacy's creative director, the mind behind its rebirth. Daniel Carter leaned against a counter nearby, his charcoal suit traded for a sweater, his brown eyes warm as he watched her work. Together, they'd turned a temple of elitism into a space for everyone, proving luxury didn't need gatekeepers. The grand opening buzzed with life. A young black woman in a thrift store coat tried on a $300 necklace. A clerk, smiling as she offered a mirror. An older Latino man browsed wallets, no one shadowing him with suspicion. The staff, diverse in age, race, size, wore name tags listing languages they spoke, connecting with customers in ways Luxe Haven never had. Sales were up 40% from the old days, the numbers flashing on Daniel's phone, proof that inclusion wasn't just right, it was smart. Across town, James Peterson stood behind a counter at a discount chain, his gray suit replaced by a blue polyester vest, his salt and pepper hair dull under fluorescent lights. He handed a tube of $5 lotion to a customer, his voice flat, his eyes avoiding hers. The fall from Luxe Haven's throne had been swift. No high-end store would touch him after the viral video of his meltdown. He judged Maya by her jacket. Now he lived the lesson every day. Maya stepped to a podium, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Legacy isn't about who you look like," she said, her tone steady, her gaze sweeping the room. "It's about what you value. We're here to make luxury mean something new. Quality for anyone who walks in, not just the ones you expect." She paused, her eyes softening. "I was thrown out of this store for being me. Now, it's a place where everyone belongs." Daniel joined her, his hand brushing hers, a quiet anchor. "This is our legacy," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not just a store, a reminder. Judge someone wrong, and you lose more than you think." The crowd cheered, phones flashing, the message sinking in. Maya smiled, her scraped knee a memory, her strength the foundation of something bigger. Legacy wasn't just their win, it was a revolution, one door at a time.